and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on our playlist, Dining with the Deceased, where we visit locations that are supposedly haunted. Today I'm coming to you from Seattle. There's the Space Needle right behind me, and we're going to visit Central Saloon that is said to be haunted not just by any old ghosts, but by the ghosts of famous musicians. I hope you enjoy the episode and this little tour of one of Seattle's most haunted places. I'm Stacey Lee. Let's begin.
There are only a few cities in the world that can claim they birthed an entire genre of music. New Orleans is where jazz was born. Austin, Texas is often credited as the home of indie country. Los Angeles birthed gangster rap. Memphis, Tennessee was very influential during the early days of rock and roll. And then you have Seattle. You really cannot separate the great city of Seattle from the music that was born here, grunge. Grunge music is an alternative rock genre born from the subculture of disillusioned, disenfranchised youth. And if you haven't been to Seattle, it's tough to imagine that music coming from anywhere but Seattle. Seattle is an absolutely beautiful place, but it is very gray and rainy a lot of the time. And if it were possible to hear a city, Seattle would sound just like the music it's so famous for. Dark and moody, heavy and industrial, but with lots of heart. That's Seattle. Seattle has lots of bars and clubs. The music and club business is a really tough scene. Some bars open and become very popular quickly, which can lead to their failure because then they become too trendy and fall out of fashion. Other bars get a reputation for being hangouts for certain groups or crowds, and then those bars fail because anyone outside of those groups, they don't want to hang out at that kind of bar. A lot of bars survive because they're just generic enough to become the local spot, but it is, like I said, a very tough business. Very few bars, nightclubs, live music venues stand the test of time. If you find a bar that's been open for longer than 20 years, it's on a very short list in any city. But of the millions of bars in the world, you can count the one we're visiting today on the shortest of the short lists. This is Central Saloon in downtown Seattle, and this venue forever changed the landscape of American music. Some of the most famous bands in the world got their start right here on this little stage in this incredible old bar. This building was born out of fire. Downtown Seattle pretty much burned to the ground in the Great Fire of 1889 when an overturned glue pot in a carpentry shop lit the building the shop was in on fire. It spread very quickly from building to building, and by the end of the day, the entire central business district of Seattle was destroyed. It took years for the city to rebuild and begin to get back to business as usual. In 1892, this building's owner, Thomas Watson, opened the Watson Brothers famous restaurant. The restaurant operated successfully for about 9 years, and then Thomas Watson sold the business to two men, Jameson and McFarland, who changed the name to the Seattle Bar. Shortly after Jameson and McFarland took over, a gold rush hit the Yukon and Seattle was booming. The two owners did so well that they opened a second location called the J&M Hotel and Saloon. In 1907, they sold the Seattle Bar to two men named Master and Casey. The saloon quickly became a place for miners, loggers, sailors, and other Wild West figures, rugged adventurers who were in search of gold. These old photos are treasures. Can you imagine coming out here to the city on the edge of the country, hoping to strike it rich? It was a very exciting time, but also a very tough time. In 1919, the seaport in Seattle began to really expand, with new people arriving in the city every day to work in the shipyards, as loggers and as miners. At one point in time, the bar was also a brothel, and I found another article that said it actually served as a post office at one time. It's been many other things in addition to being a bar, but it's always been a bar, and it is the oldest bar in Seattle. The Seattle Bar then became the Central Cafe. It was a place for these tough people to get a beer, get a shot of whiskey, and have some affordable food. The Central Cafe operated clear into the 1970s, which that in itself is remarkable. Restaurants and bars just do not stay open that long. Yes, this is a great location, but you have to be doing a lot of things right to be able to survive for that long in such a tough business. In the 1970s, the area the building sits in, called Pioneer Square, was declared a historical site, and when that happened, the Central was added to the historical registry as well. In the 1980s, new ownership came into the Central, and the new owners had a strong desire to bring live music to the venue. They made changes to the interior, building a really substantial stage for such a small place, and they had kind of a mission to become a hub for really good live music. Sometimes you get very lucky and you have the right people who love music and who understand the music scene, running a venue at just the right time in history, and magic happens. In 1986, Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Penman started an independent label called Sub Pop Records. The label provided representation for bands that Pavitt and Penman saw promise in. Larger labels really sat up and took notice when the small label released singles for a band called Green River and for what would become one of the greatest rock bands of all time, Soundgarden. It was actually Pavitt and Penman who first started calling this new sound grunge. That word describes very well the gritty, sometimes sad, heavy sound that the genre is known for. Aspiring bands liked playing the Central Saloon because it was considered unpolished, like they were. It was unapologetically divey and obviously old, and it really fit the aesthetic for this new sound. A lot of bars want bands to play covers, other people's songs, because that's what the audience is familiar with. The Central Saloon was not about that. Pavitt and Penman went out of their way to create a platform for artists who wanted to play original music. Most of the bars at that time were booking hair bands and cover bands, but not the Central. They wanted original stuff. They wanted artists. They wanted the newest thing, and bands really like a venue that supports that kind of artistic freedom. On April 16, 1988, the Central booked a band for the first time, and that band was called Nirvana. Can you imagine being at Nirvana's first show? My husband saw Tool in about 1990 before they got big at the Blue Note in Columbia, Missouri, with about 20 other people one night, and I've always been so jealous of him for that. Pavitt and Penman saw Nirvana live for the first time that night in 1988. Pavitt said, "There might have been 10 people in the room that night, and I wasn't that impressed, but I felt Kurt had a good voice and that we should do a single with them." He formed a relationship with Nirvana, and Sub Pop was the label that would release Nirvana's debut album, Bleach. What a great album. These old photos are just incredible, especially since we lost Kurt Cobain just a few years after their skyrocket to superstardom. I love looking at them, but they also kind of make me sad. The Central really took off, becoming the place every band wanted to play. Before long, some of the greatest bands to ever play would get their start right here in this old brick building. I found this absolute treasure, actual footage of Alice in Chains playing at the Central Saloon. I can't play you the audio here because of copyright issues, and I'm not going to lie, it's pretty rough. They're one of my favorite bands, but let's just say they definitely polished up the act after this. But the raw talent is definitely there. And yeah, this footage is just priceless. Mother Love Bone got their start here. The Melvins, great bands, but it was Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, and Pearl Jam that really went on to become megastars. Not all of the big grunge bands played at the Central, but it is definitely the birthplace of the movement that took over the world. I am always a little bit in awe when I visit places like this. It's a building. It's a brick building. But it's not. It's hallowed ground. You're walking where history was made. You're standing between walls that, if they could talk, would have some of the greatest stories in rock history to tell. Even when I went to the bathroom, I couldn't help think about how many people had been in the bathrooms and the things that went on in them. This little stage, barely big enough to hold a band, although I've played on much smaller, was the literal platform that launched so many careers. This is a special place. To think of all the artists and musicians, just young kids at the time, that stood on this stage who went on to take over the world, it's just awesome. At the same time, it's really sad because so many of them are gone. Kurt, Chris, Lane, Scott, Andrew, and so many more from that era are gone, very young, and all we have left is the music and the memories. But according to some people, music and memories aren't all that's left. Some people believe that the ghosts of the people who have played on this stage visit from time to time, and that maybe they never really left. Many people claim to have seen the ghost of Jimi Hendrix, who frequented this bar long before it became the birthplace to the grunge scene. Jimi Hendrix was born in Seattle and used to come here all the time in his late teens and early 20s. Customers and employees claim to have seen his ghost in the storage room and the hallways, and one bartender swears up and down he spoke with Jimi one night late after the bar closed. People who spend a lot of time here say it is not uncommon to see ghosts appear and vanish all over the building. They're most often seen on the mezzanine, in the restrooms, and right up against the stage during crowded shows. It's said the ghosts like to hang out in the staff offices and often right at the bar. People claim to see spirits dressed in clothing from the logging days, and some even have burnt faces and limbs from the Great Fire of 1889. Most of the ghosts seem to be grunge kids from the late 1980s and early 1990s, still wandering in the bar, the place where they had some of the best times of their lives. Guests and employees alike often report disembodied voices and say that they have felt and heard whispers in their ears. One night, a bartender watched in shock as a shadow figure flickered across the stage and blocked out a stage light. Another employee claims he heard ghostly footsteps walking across the stage when he was all alone in the main hall. A team of paranormal investigators spent the night here and encountered the apparition of a woman dressed in white and a large black shadow with a masculine frame. One night, a female customer came screaming out of the restroom, saying there was a large shadow lurking in the corner as she emerged from a bathroom stall. Another woman claimed she was pushed in the walkway when she was all alone. One night, a sound engineer who was rolling cables after a show felt a brush of wind in his face and his cap was knocked from his head. There are employees that don't want to be alone in the building and others that won't go into certain areas here. With this many accounts of paranormal experiences, you have to wonder just how many people have chosen to remain here or to visit one of their old hangouts. There's no way of knowing just how many thousands of people have passed through these doors in the now 130 years the building has stood here. Everyone from industrial-era miners to rock stars have spent time behind these doors, and it seems like they had such a good time, some decided to stay. As we always do on this playlist, we sample the food in the haunted location. This is Dining with Death. The Central Saloon has a small kitchen with a menu that changes whenever the cooks feel like making something different. It looks like a pretty casual setup. There's a menu board and it changes all the time. We ordered the carnitas tacos and the cheesy garlic bread. The little tacos were actually really good, better than I was expecting. The meat was well seasoned and they had fresh onions and cilantro and a little Oaxaca cheese. They came with a lime to squeeze over them for a little bit of acid. They were tasty, and I'm sure the customers here are happy to have a little food, especially on the nights where you might need to soak up a few too many drinks. The cheesy garlic bread was solid, nice and toasty, chewy and crispy and carby. The perfect food for when you're hungry for a bite or need something in your stomach to go with those cocktails. The bar is covered in memorabilia and other things. They've got some fantastic photos of the artists made famous right here, and even a couple of little shrines to some of them. There's great paintings and artwork of famous faces and this long half wall covered in historic photos and documents that I found really interesting. But the stage is definitely the centerpiece of the hall for me. I just kind of stood there in awe, thinking about what happened right here. These were just guys in bands playing music, giving it a go to see what would happen. Hitting it big in a band is more rare than getting hit by lightning. It just hardly ever happens. And not only did it happen here for one band, it happened here for multiple bands. That's what I can't wrap my head around. I don't know of another place that can say so many bands that went on to become megastars got their start at the same spot. It was pretty awe-inspiring for me. If you're not already aware of this tradition, a lot of bars around the country have a long-standing practice of stapling dollar bills to the ceiling. Sometimes people write their wishes on them. Sometimes it's where they're visiting from. But here at the Central, where the ceiling is so high, it seems a really spectacular thing. I am really very curious to know not only how they got up there, but how long they've been there and who wrote on those dollar bills. I love it. It's just another odd quirk in this absolutely incredible spot that is unlike any other spot in the world. The birthplace of grunge music. the launching pad for so many of the world's biggest stars. This ancient little bar in the middle of Seattle is home to one of the most spectacular stories in the history of music, and it's such a great place that it seems like some of its former customers have decided they're here to stay.
Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Dining with the Deceased. If you haven't subscribed to the channel and you like videos like this, please do that. It helps me a lot. I hope you're well, stay safe, and be kind to each other. And I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.